I uncovered over $1 trillion in government waste, with the State Department and USAID being some of the worst offenders.
The federal government has made over $2.7 trillion in improper payments since 2003.
Over the last few weeks, the Doge effort has begun to uncover not only how massive the waste, fraud, and abuse is, but also the extent at which D.C. politicians and too many obstinate bureaucrats have coordinated to create what is essentially the largest money laundering scheme in history.
So when you think about what happened during the pandemic, $1 trillion was stolen. 70% of that money went overseas.
100 years old, everybody knows that's not so. We have a very corrupt country, and it's a sad thing to say, but we're figuring it out. Now, the good thing about...
exemption talk about widespread fraud and abuse.
Oh, yeah, tremendous fraud. There's tremendous fraud, and it's hard to believe that you can have that kind of fraud. Hundreds of millions and even billions of dollars have been given to. When you look at the kind of money, billions and billions of dollars being thrown away illegally, and there's no chance. I mean, I say it in front of our Attorney General, there's no chance that there's not kickbacks or something going on. When you give millions and millions of dollars to somebody that stands to look at something for 15 minutes and walks away with millions of dollars, that money's coming back in some form. And that's only one form of corruption. The biggest thing is what they do to our country. They're taking massive amounts of money and spending it on items. I went through a list of 200 expenditures that were made, and I found 3 that looked like they were reasonable. Okay, 3. And we'll be talking about that tomorrow. We have a lot of stuff, and I want to commend Elon because he's done a fantastic. He doesn't need this. You know, he's abused by you people every day. He's found more things than anybody could find. I think this is a massive fraud that's taken place. And then you have judges that are activists, and they sit there and they say, oh, as an example, $59 million going to a little small group in New York City. You get nothing going to North Carolina to help nothing. They say, we don't have any money because they've given it away on the border. But you have nothing. What they did to North Carolina is a shame. And then they sent $59 million to New York City for a hotel for a little bit of what they've done. A hotel that was not luxury, that's getting luxury rates for migrants, where they're making a fortune. And we catch them. But a judge says, well, even though it may be a fraud, you have to send the money in anyway. Send the money. I said, wait a minute. We have money that shouldn't go because we caught it before it was sent out, but they want the money to go anyway. And this is just one group. We haven't talked about Department of Education. We haven't talked about the military. We haven't talked about a lot of things that are very big. And what's happened is, as an example, you'll have cases where you have a 3-month contract, and maybe the guy that signs the contract leaves. Maybe he gets rich. All of a sudden he leaves for that reason. But you have a 3-month contract, and maybe he leaves. So the contract is sitting there, and the people signing the checks don't know it's 3 months, and it goes on for years. The 3 months turns out to be 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. Just goes on forever. And the guy on the other side of the contract just keeps getting check after check after check, because Elon had an expression yesterday, because nobody cares. It's a great expression. Nobody cares. The guy that signed the contract didn't care. Maybe there, may not be there. Maybe crooked. Who knows? But you have to care. Otherwise, you can't really run a thing like that, or you can't run a country, really, because there's so many transactions, thousands and thousands of transactions. And if you don't have people that care, you're going to lose control. And that's what's happened. And we've caught it. Now, what we caught is billions and billions of dollars, but it's a tiny fraction of the real number, because you can never catch the real number because people have gotten away with tremendous amounts of money. But this is so egregious what's taken place. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. Nobody's seen numbers like this. These are massive numbers. $9 million for somebody to go and stand in a store and see how people shop. Okay? I mean, you take a look at these things. It's a disgrace. and then you have a country that we want to make America great again. It's very hard to make America great again when you have things like this. And you're going to see the same thing. Department of Education is going to be a disaster. The military, I mean, I see it. Look, you look at the kind of waste, fraud, and abuse that this country is going through, and we have to straighten it out. It is interesting that when you're looking for fraud, you look at items, hundreds of items, and you'll find one or two, maybe, if you're lucky. Here's something where you look at data, and they're all fraudulent. You know, by just looking at the topic, they're all fraudulent, except it's the opposite. You'll find one or two that's like a legitimate reason. So, and, you know, the other thing that it's been bothering me for a long time, because I solved the problem with NATO. They paid hundreds of billions of dollars into the funds of NATO when I said, you got to pay. They have to pay. They have to find out, where's the money going to? We have, I believe President Zelensky said last week that he doesn't know where half of the money is that we gave him. Well, we gave them, I believe, $350 billion, but let's say it's something less than that, but it's a lot. And we have to equalize with Europe, because Europe has given a very much smaller percentage than that. I think Europe has given $100 billion, and we've given, let's say, 300 plus. And it's more important for them than it is for us. We have an ocean in between, and they don't. But where is all the money that's been given? Where is it going? And I've never seen an accounting of it. We give hundreds of billions of dollars. I don't see any accounting. So, but look at this, from 90 to 99, Social Security, 6,054,000 people. Well, that's okay. Maybe that's possible. 90 to 99, maybe it's possible. It's a lot of people, though, at that. But people that live to 100 to 109, 4,734,000. Wow, that's a lot. That means over 100 years old. There are 4 million people. I don't know too many. I know people that are doing great in their 90s, but not too many people over 100. But over 120, from 120 years old, people that are 120 years old up to 129, 3,472,000 people. Wow. That can't possibly be, because the record is like, I think it's one person, a woman, lived to 127, but they have 3,472. Okay, but now we're going really in. People from 130 years old to 139 year old, 3,936,000. Wow. I wonder if people are getting paid with all this. I mean, are these checks? And that's what we're checking right now. People from 140 years old to 149 years old, 3,542,000, 140 years old and beyond. Now we're really going, because we're looking to break the record by 25 years. People from 150 years old to 159 years old, 1,345,000. These are by the way, these are in the computer files. This is what they do well. They're super. I asked Elon, who are these Doge people? He said they're super brilliant computer people, and they love the country. It's simple. Wait a minute. People from 160 years old to 169 years, 121,000. So 160-year-old people. 170 to 179,000, 6,087. But now, let's go into the real numbers. From 200 to 209 years old, 879 people. From 210 years old, I haven't met any of them. And if I did, I would bless them. I would worship the ground they walk on. 210 to 219 years, 866. From 220 years old to 229 years old, 1,039. And then you have two people. From 240 years old to 249 years old, one person. And there's one person that's 360 years old. That's just that. And then, where's the money being spent, right? Let's go into that for just a second. $520 million for a consultant on the environment. It's called Environmental, Social, and Governance. investments in Africa and mobilize private sector resources, $520 million. Somebody got $520 million for an environmental, sounds like an environmental study. I've always been one that paid a lot of money for my environmental studies, but I paid like $50,000, not $520 million. $520 million for ESG. $25 million to promote biodiversity, conservation, and promote licit livelihoods by developing socially responsible behavior in the country of Colombia. Well, that's nice. $25 million to go into Colombia for something that nobody ever heard of. $40 million to improve the social and economic inclusion of sedentary migrants. $40 million. $42 million for Johns Hopkins, great place, to research and drive social and behavior change in Uganda. $42 million. What about us? What about social change in our country? $70 million for a center at Purdue to research university-sourced, evidence-based solutions to developmental challenges. I mean, these are massive numbers on things that nobody ever heard about. $10 million for Mozambique voluntary medical male circumcisions. $10 million for circumcisions in another country. $9.7 million for UC Berkeley to develop a cohort of Cambodian youth with enterprise-driven skills. In other words, let's teach them something about enterprise. What about our people? Can't we teach them about enterprise? $2.3 million for strengthening independent voices in Cambodia. $32 million to the Prague Civil Society Center, which is a very liberal group of people. Wonder how much of that money came back to the people that approved it. $14 million for improving public procurement in Serbia. $486 million to the Consortium for Elections and Political Process Strengthening, including $22 million for inclusive and participatory political process in Moldova, and $21 million for voter turnout in India. Well, why are we giving $21 million to India? They got a lot of money. They're one of the highest taxing countries in the world in terms of us. We can hardly get in there because their tariffs are so high. I have a lot of respect for India. I have a lot of respect for the Prime Minister. He just left, as you know, 2 days ago. But we're giving $21 million for voter turnout. It's voter turnout in India. What about, like, voter turnout here? We've done that, I guess. We did $500 million, didn't we? It's called the lockboxes. $20 million for fiscal federalism in Nepal. Listen to these numbers. This is all fraud. $19 million for biodiversity conservation in Nepal. $1.5 million for voter confidence. We want to give them confidence in Liberia. $14 million for social cohesion in Mali. $2.5 million for inclusive democracies in South Africa. $47 million for improving learning outcomes in Asia. Asia's doing very well. They're doing a lot better than we do in the schools, aren't they? $2 million to develop sustainable recycling models to increase socioeconomic cohesion among marginalized communities in Kosovo and Escali and in Egypt. We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars. I could, by the way, I could read this all day long. I could go on all day long, and you'll see hundreds of billions of dollars, and we're doing it. But when I saw the Social Security numbers, I said, wow, that's really something. So we have, let's just go above 100 years old. We have millions and millions of people over 100 years old. Everybody knows that's not so. We have a very corrupt country, and it's a sad thing to say, but we're figuring it out. Now,
The reckless and wasteful spending of our federal government, particularly when it comes to foreign aid. I uncovered over $1 trillion in government waste, with the State Department and USAID being some of the worst offenders. Let me give you just a few examples of what these unelected bureaucrats are spending your hard-earned money on. $4.8 million went to Ukraine's public affairs office in Kiev to fund social media influencers. Instead of protecting our own border, $2.1 million was sent to Paraguay to enhance their border security. USAID also funded a group of Ukrainian women-led designers to travel to the Paris Fashion Show. I don't know about you, but I'd imagine Ukrainian women have more important things to worry about than appearing in the Paris Fashion Show. USAID spent $2 million on transgender surgeries, hormone therapy, and gender-affirming care in Guatemala. $3 million was spent to promote girl-centric climate action in Brazil. And I'd love to picture what a conversation about girl-centered climate action looks like. It's like, hey, Barbie, do you know what girl-centered climate change is? Since when do we believe arguments need to be tailored for girls to understand? How insulting to women at large that they think there are special arguments for girls to understand that are different than boys. $25,000 to fund a transgender opera in Colombia. Was nobody in Colombia willing to buy a ticket? USAID spent $32,000 in Peru to create a comic featuring a trans hero to address social and mental health issues. What does that have to do with diplomacy? $20,000 to fund a DEI program for a drag theater in Ecuador. $20 million was spent to produce a new Sesame Street show in Iraq. USAID spent $6 million to promote a project boosting sustainable tourism in Egypt. I guess the U.S. is now the travel agent for the entire world since they spent $50 million on Tunisia's tourism, even though it's already one of the most visited countries in Africa. USAID gave $87.9 million to help Afghans farm, and incidentally, farm poppy, the plant from which opium is extracted. As of 2021, Afghanistan supplied 90% of the world's heroin. I thought the saying in the U.S. was just say no to drugs. How about we just say no to wasteful foreign aid? $70,000 for a live musical event to promote diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in Ireland. State Department paid $330,000 to compile a disinformation index to blacklist conservative media outlets. USAID funneled over $54 million to EcoHealth Alliance, funding the very organization linked to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, the likely origin of the COVID-19 pandemic. Disgraceful. $15 million was awarded to Taliban-controlled Afghanistan to distribute oral contraceptives and condoms. There's still a $3 billion fund for Afghan reconstruction that I've tried to take that money to pay for other things that the government is spending money on, and yet there's been resistance by the other side to deplete that fund and say, we're done funding things in Afghanistan. This is just the tip of the iceberg. These are taxpayer dollars being used to fund ideologically misguided, ineffective, and unnecessary projects, thanks to the blundering bureaucracy, while our own citizens struggle to put food on the table. This is not what our government was designed to do. The U.S. government is not a charity, and it should not be doling out cash to foreign organizations, some of which actively oppose the United States with no oversight. And we don't have the money to give. We're borrowing the money we send. We need to ask a simple question. Why are we borrowing money to send money overseas? Even if USAID eliminated the crazy left-wing grants for trans operas, it still makes no sense to borrow money to then turn around and send it overseas. Borrowing money to send as charity is like the worker who has no money left after paying for their food, rent, and gas, saying, oh, well, I see this homeless person, I have such great sympathy. I'll go to the bank and I'll borrow $1,000 to give to this person. That's what we are doing. We can't pay for our own, and we are borrowing the money we send overseas. That money could be used to pay down our $36 trillion debt and take care of the American people, the very people who actually pay these taxes in the first place. It's time for a real change.
Over the last few weeks, the Doge effort has begun to uncover not only how massive the waste, fraud, and abuse is, but also the extent at which D.C. politicians and too many obstinate bureaucrats have coordinated to create what is essentially the largest money laundering scheme in history. And while Americans have been working to make ends meet, they have been using taxpayer dollars to fund unnecessary, egregious, and even evil things here at home and around the world. an internal threat, but you also mentioned transnational fraud rings, terrorist organizations, nation states, North Korea, nuclear weapons programs funded by our tax dollars, China, Nigeria, Iran, Romania, Russia, not our friends necessarily that are being funded by taxpayer dollars. Could you give us some examples of how this is happening?
God, yeah. So when you think about what happened during the pandemic, $1 trillion was stolen. 70% of that money went overseas. And I can give you some examples. In a Western state, they had more people applying for unemployment insurance benefits than they had individuals over 18. So you have to have these controls in place, right? These aren't individuals stealing, Mr. Cloud. These are organized criminal groups, both domestic and transnational.
The bureaucrats who have run Washington for decades are beyond the point of forgiveness. Their sheer incompetence and pure spite for the hardworking American people have resulted in total failure. The federal government has made over $2.7 trillion in improper payments since 2003. Including $236 billion in 2023 alone. Those are trillions of dollars that honest Americans have paid in taxes at gunpoint over the years. As we approach April 15th, Americans are once again preparing to do their taxes and fork over their unfair share of money it takes to run this country. And I have to tell you, the American people have not been getting their money's worth for a long time. Most improper payments in recent years were issued through 5 programs: Medicare, Medicaid, the Earned Income Tax Credit, Pandemic Unemployment Insurance, and the Paycheck Protection Program. But a total of 16 federal programs had improper payment rates of 10% or more in 2023. That includes SNAP, the federal food stamp program, which paid out $10 billion taxpayer dollars improperly. To get their arms around this problem, Elon Musk and the Doge team went straight to the source. They went to the Treasury Department's Fiscal Service, which makes about 90% of the trillions in federal payments issued annually. The audit of these payment systems was long overdue. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent gave Doge employees working for the government read-only access to these systems so they could conduct that initial audit. That audit is already paying dividends. Musk learned that the databases federal agencies are supposed to check to prevent payments to fraudsters, crime rings, and dead people are not being kept up to date. Going forward, we are going to get more mileage out of these do not pay databases. That means fewer improper payments and less fraud and waste of taxpayer dollars.
You know, you don't have to be a rocket scientist. You could just read the Taliban is classified, and if you don't know, the Taliban's in charge of Afghanistan. They're classified as a specially designated global terrorist organization by OFAC. So post-2021, so this is last year, 2024, we spent $697 million of the taxpayers' dollars in Afghanistan, including $534,719,000 in change from USAID in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is ruled by folks named Sarayuddin Haqqani. The Haqqani network mean anything to anybody in the room? How about in the room? Your money, $697 million annually, plus the shipments of cash funds madrasas, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, ISIS Khorasan, terrorist training camps. That's what it's funding.
Do you have any message for Ukrainians who, after 3 years of fighting, might feel betrayed or disappointed at not having a seat at these initial talks in Saudi Arabia?
Well, I think I'm really disappointed in what's happened. I've been watching this for 3 years. It's a war that would have never happened if I was president, and I've been watching these people being killed at levels that you've rarely seen, not even close, since the Second World War. And I'm very disappointed. I hear that, they're upset about not having a seat. Well, they've had a seat for 3 years and a long time before that. This could have been settled very easily. Just a half-baked negotiator could have settled this years ago without the the loss of much land, very little land, without the loss of any lives. And I think I have the power to end this war. And I think it's going very well. But today I heard, oh, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal. I could have made a deal for Ukraine that would have given them almost all of the land, everything, almost all of the land, and no people would have been killed, and no city would have been demolished, and not one dome would have been knocked down.
I want to read you an email that I was asked to keep confidential. I've been thinking about this for a long time, but I now believe that reading it to you will go some way to explain why I'm worried about the status of scientific research generally, but especially in the foundations of physics. I received this email about 7 years ago after I published a comment in Nature Physics titled "Science Needs Reason to be Trusted." In it, I explained how I lost trust in scientific self-correction after I realized how much of what's published in the foundations of physics is nonsense and continues to be nonsense. This email came from someone who I've met a few times but don't know in any depth, and who at the time worked at a top institution in the United States. To honor the request of confidentiality, I've removed some details. Hi Sabine, I'm if you remember me. I'm not using my work email. The topic is a bit delicate and I hope that our conversation will remain confidential. I'm contacting you regarding your recent paper in Nature, which made a lot of noise. First of all, congratulations on a nice paper. If you wanted to attract attention, you managed to do this. Actually, I'd like to ask you next time, think not only about short-term personal benefits, but about the community in general. You understand what consequences your publication might bring for our community? What are all these BSM model builders with exaggerated self-opinion going to do afterwards? What about experimentalists who survive hiding inside big multi-TV collaborations? Can you offer them all any decent employment alternatives? Some of them have families and young children. Some of them are already too old to get employment elsewhere. For some of them, academia is the only way to get US visa. If you like, yes, what we created is a bubble, but it helps thousands of those guys and their families not to die from hunger. We all do the same stuff and have some trade secrets. For example, I'm one of the authors of the so-called model. Pretty useless stuff, old refurbished with a couple of new blows and whistles. But if people buy this and it helps them to get grants, who cares? For people who pay us, all we do is just noise. They have zero idea that elementary particles exist. They pay us from public funds, not from their own, and basically pay for something cool, some new crazy hype, which they need either to include into their science spending reports or, in case of universities, to attract students. Your paper made a lot of noise and most likely will affect redistribution of HEP funds towards other areas, but I doubt that you'll be able to suggest and implement any organizational changes. Also, any changes of quality criteria which would demonstrate uselessness of somebody's work will have zero chance of approval. I understand that all what I wrote above might sound a bit harsh. Sorry for this. But this is how our society is built, and this is not only a problem in the HEP community, but also exists in all other areas. My heart is bleeding when I regularly see bright and intelligent persons with independent ways of thinking leaving academia or getting kicked out, whereas obedient idiots remain. But there's nothing we can do. Those who get kicked out usually find better opportunities outside of academia. Those who remain in academia accept the rules and enjoy the comfort of academic life. Of course, sometimes there are exceptions, like string theorists Smolin and White, but I doubt you'd like to share their destiny. I'm reading this to you as an illustration, a rare example of somebody else's honest words. And soon taxpayers will start asking some tough questions. Jesus, use your brain. Your problem isn't that I'm making noise. Your problem is that you're lying to the people who pay you. Your problem is that you're cowards without a shred of scientific integrity. Your problem is that every bubble eventually bursts.
The Matrix is a system, Neo. That system is our enemy. But when you're inside, you look around, what do you see? Businessmen, teachers, lawyers, carpenters, the very minds of the people we are trying to save. But until we do, these people are still a part of that system, and that makes them our enemy. You have to understand, most of these people are not ready to be unplugged. And many of them are so inert, so hopelessly dependent on the system, that they will fight to protect it. Freeze it.
This isn't the Matrix.
No. It's another training program designed to teach you one thing. If you are not one of us, you are one of them.
We have survived by hiding from them, by running from them. But they are the gatekeepers. They are guarding all the doors, they are holding all the keys, which means that sooner or later, someone is going to have to fight them.
Someone.
They will never be as strong or as fast as you can be.
What are you trying to tell me? That I can dodge bullets?
No, Neo. I'm trying to tell you that when you're ready, you won't have to.
This was never about money for us. It was about us against the system. That system that kills the human spirit. We stand for something. To those dead souls inching along the freeways in their metal coffins, we show them that the human spirit is still alive.